Programming Throwdown, episode 168, Godot. Take it away, Patrick.
Welcome, everyone. Starting with a bit of a rant. Is that? I don't know. Man, that's so negative. It's okay.
I have something to rant about. We have a pair of rants.
Oh, okay.
Maybe, is there a word for that? You know how there's like a flock of geese? Is there a word for a gaggle of rants?
Okay. All right. Going into my rant. So one of the things that has been like a recurring theme, and it feels like it's getting worse. Now, I guess like to set the context, if this is your first episode with us, maybe you don't know, but I don't know how you would call the like role of software I do. So maybe it's particular to the kinds of software I do, but it's been persistent. So it's some combination of embedded application engineering. Maybe web is a bit better. I don't know. But maybe backend is pretty similar. And that is the number of things you're expected to know how to do on a computer that really don't have anything to do with programming, but you're just like, you're supposed to know how to take care of it. Like just random things, not just the kind of slightly strange things. Like you need to know how to set up your computer, like plug in the keyboard and mouse and, monitor. No, admittedly, these things aren't hard and most of us know how to do them, but like, this isn't really related to programming. Like you could not know how to swap hard drives on your computer and install new RAM. But occasionally, like someone the other day had a hard drive, crap out. And so the IT person just like sent them a new hard drive in the internal mail and like, here, install the new hard drive or whatever. Now, people knew
that is not common.
Okay. Weird, right? But like, you wouldn't be also surprised that a programmer was expected to know like how to install their own hard drive. Like, because I guess it's part of my rant. It's just par for the course. Weird for, the company or whatever, but just, not that, but like, dealing with errors in your operating system, finagling issues about network connectivity. Even if you don't develop a software that has anything to do with, sockets and, IP connections and just any of that stuff, you're still expected to know how to debug that at some level and kind of figure it out. And then also things about just like setting up your develop environment, right? Like having your IDE set up properly and getting all of the compilers working and all of that. There's no just like sit down and here's a text box and your sort of expectation is to just, type in the program. And I guess that's true with a lot of jobs. There's like lots of extra stuff you need to know. But it gets really esoteric. So I develop in C++, which is especially bad. So just the amount of like how to get your system's libraries installed correctly so they can be accessed. But the same is true Python, even when using pip or virtual environment or whatever, like you still have issues with like conflicting packages and package managers and Linux stuff. So it's not sufficient to just, most people would know Windows or Mac OS, but probably need to know Linux, and how to debug various issues when you mess something up in one of your paths and, how to have your profile set up. And so anyways, my rant is just becoming like, there's some stuff for like fixing this and virtual development environments, but they're not here yet. And I guess I would say they can't come soon enough.
Yeah, a couple of things there. One, we have this wiki page it's called Landing Your First Pull Request. And it's a freaking enormous. Like there's just like an insane amount of things you have to do. We have a GitHub bot that actually merges all the pull requests. Like you don't actually merge them yourself. And so, yeah, you have to like, run all the unit tests and then run lint. And there's a billion different kinds of lint. There's MyPy and then there's Flake, which like both, I guess, check different things. They're not totally overlapping, and then there's all these other things. As you said, there's like the pip dependencies, making sure that's all okay. And then, to your point, do this wacky thing where everything runs in a Docker container. Like you actually can't run anything on your own computer because, as you said, you don't have any of the libraries or anything. So everything has to run inside this Docker container, which is kind of painful. If you need to use GDB, or any type of debugger, you have to do this remote GDB or you TCP into like your own computer. It's just weird. But yeah, it's like a huge laundry list of stuff. And like, this is like, none of it has anything to do with the code that you wrote. Like that entire document, you could just be adding a semicolon and you have to go through that whole thing. The other part of it is, I think in general, like just stepping back a bit, like there's just enormous cognitive overhead that there wasn't before. I was thinking about um, travel agents, and now you'd have a travel agent kind of book everything for you and find the right flight and all of that. Now, travel agents are even before our time, really. I mean, I actually never used one, um, but now you have to do all of that yourself, and the search and retrieval is really good, so that normal people like us could do it at all. But still, it's like cognitive overhead that you didn't have before. And I think same thing with the bank, and if you have an issue with your Amazon package or something, it's just there's an extraordinary amount of cognitive overhead. And I think as a programmer, it also just seems to keep increasing the amount of things that you have to do.
I was watching some movie the other day. I don't even remember what movie it was. And it was just one of the funny standout things was the person wanted to fly somewhere. So they drove to the airport to go inside the airport to book a ticket. They weren't flying. They just like went to the airport for the purpose of like talking to a booking agent and booking a ticket. And it was like, oh, yeah, I guess that makes sense. Like people did that like that, or like you said, you phoned up someone or phoned up,
Yep.
And I think that happened to me the other day. We were trying to book something online. It was having a glitch and we had to like talk to a person and like do it verbally. And they were reciting back to us like the various times. And it was just like, oh man, this is, yeah. In some ways it's lots better. But as you pointed out, like the number of tyranny of choice, I guess, like the number of things you can choose from and the number, and it just like everything becomes an analytical decision. And
yeah. I mean, to riffing off your point, I've never had a company send me a hard drive or anything like that, but I did have a hardware failure yesterday. It was really weird. I was on my computer, and this is my personal computer. And then all of a sudden, like Steam was updating some game in the background, and I was coding something up. I was actually working on MameHub, which we should talk about at some point. But I was bringing that back, and all of a sudden, like I look and I see, oh, Steam is updating some game, and it's been updating for almost the entire day. And basically, this took a ton of triage. What I found out was my hard drive was only reading and writing at 800 kilobytes a second. And I was immediately, yeah, I was thinking, oh man, I'm going to lose this hard drive, and I just bought it and it has all my stuff on it. And, I started getting kind of nervous. But then I was like, I ran all the smart tests and diagnostics and everything. Everything came back fine. It's just nothing would actually finish, like scanning the drive. I thought maybe I needed to free up space, but I didn't. And it turns out the SATA cable was bad. It went bad.
Oh.
And I've basically been using the same SATA cables for probably 15 years or something, just because I keep, when I get new ones, they just go in a box, and I just already have the other one plugged in a drive, and then I change the drive. I'm not changing the drive and the SATA cable at the same time, really, ever. So yeah, I just swapped out the SATA cable, but it kind of scared me. And to your point, like, I don't know, like we have to fix these things ourselves. I don't really know, like who I don't think Geek Squad will come and go look at this homebrew machine.
I mean, they will, but they'll also do 100 other things you didn't want.
Yeah, that's right. I'll end up with like 5 copies of Norton antivirus or something.
The other one I'll drop just here for anyone who runs into it. HDMI cables are not all the same. So over the years, if you're still using a really old HDMI cable, it may not be able to like support the proper bandwidth if you're trying to like, do 4K Blu-rays or something. It's just something I was unaware of, but
really, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow. How do you know? Is it printed on the cable or anything?
That's a great question.
You have to try it.
You just buy the one that has the bandwidth you want and use it. That's the...
Well, that's the advantage of us being our own Geek Squad is like, if something doesn't work, we can order a cable and it's only $8. And it's like still a tiny fraction of the cost of getting someone to come to your house. So like if you order the cable and it's wrong, it's like, well, I have an upgraded cable now and I can keep debugging.
And then you end up with the box of cables that every geek has in the closet, which is just
I have it. You can actually, folks at home, we stopped doing video because we felt like we had to, get all prettied up and everything. So we stopped doing that. But folks at home can't see the giant box of cables that Patrick can see in the background. Another thing that happened to me last week. So I went through a period where I was ordering a ton of stuff from AliExpress and these like straight from China things. And slowly, it's like come to be just a terrible investment. And this is really the capstone on it. I have a Raspberry Pi 4, and I bought this thing that could control multiple servos because every year my Halloween scare bot just gets more and more extreme. And so it's at the point now where I needed something to control a bunch of servos. So there's this little I2C module, communicates over I2C, controls a bunch of servos. And the way it works is you connect the I2C pins to the Raspberry Pi, you connect the 3.3 volt to the Raspberry Pi, and that powers the board and sends all the signals. And then separately in the servo controller, you connect like a power supply, right, to power these servos, because the servos use way more electricity than the whole Raspberry Pi, right? So I mean, even one of them probably does. So I set it all up. It looks all correct. One thing that was kind of a tip off was my power supply was saying it was plugged in when it wasn't. That should have been a tip off that something bad was going to happen. So, but being an idiot, I plugged it in anyways, and smoke started coming out of the Raspberry Pi, and the Raspberry Pi got completely nuked. The SD card burnt my finger when I popped it out. And I was so mad. And, first I thought, what did I do? And I'm looking at everything and it looks fine. And then, I get the multimeter and it turns out this is shorted and it's just a bad component that I got, as cheap as possible, trying to save. I saved $2 off what it would cost on Amazon, and I fried like $120 worth of equipment. And I was so freaking mad, unbelievably mad. But what can you do, man? I just had to throw the Raspberry Pi in the garbage and get another one and move on.
Yeah, I guess there's a tip there too, just for people who want to play with that kind of stuff. Well, first of all, there's a high potential the stuff you would have bought on Amazon would have been exactly the same, just like
it's possible.
But the second thing is do not plug things you get like that for the first time into your computer USB port for basically the same reason. So if you have some USB powered device or whatever you get off, like get I don't know what you call that, like the one that plug like a wall wart or something else, like
a splitter.
No, like don't, like, even if it needs data, right? Like you need to like a thumb drive or whatever, right? So a thumb drive could have a short the same way, but if you at least you plug it into something that isn't going to, like, an old computer or something that isn't like your nice computer, because if you have a short in it, but like USB drives are a little different. But I'm thinking like one of these dev boards or something you soldered up and you accidentally solder across it, plug it into something that will basically, like, you're okay losing rather than your computer one, because the same thing can happen, and then you'll fry your USB port or even your motherboard. It's bad days.
Yep. And this is the second time something like this has happened to me, and the first time was my fault. First time was totally my fault. This time is not my fault. But the one telltale sign is if things have power that shouldn't. That was sort of the common denominator. It's like this thing is not yet plugged into the wall, and the light is on, and I'm getting a voltage reading on it. That's all you're only supposed to get when it's plugged into the wall. Like that right there. If you ever see something on that shouldn't be on, I told the story years ago, but in my first project, I did it on a metal bench and shorted everything. I mean, that was incredibly dumb. But the sign there was that the lights were still on, and I hadn't plugged it in yet. So that's the thing to look for.
Discovered free power.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that I had a Scarebot and a perpetual energy machine. What I actually had was just acrid smoke. Yeah.
All right. Is it time for our news of the show?
Let's do it. What's your news?
All right. So my first one, well, I guess these are mostly links. I don't think we have any news. Oh, I guess we have a little bit of news. So my first one is a blog. This is smartguess.is. Anyways, and it's talking about software estimates, which are notoriously very difficult. I don't even think it's a junior senior thing. I think it's very difficult. Yep. I'm thankful that I'm not in a high stakes software negotiating like dev estimate thing, because I can't imagine. But they were kind of making an analogy that it's like negotiating with a meteorologist. There's some caveats. I immediately sort of got the content. I like read it to make sure, but just reading it was one of those ones, like just reading the headline was enough for me to derive like lots of value and smile from it. Then the person is talking about accurately. So like if keeping all the bounds the same, like keeping the requirements the same and all of this, like the estimate is the estimate. To ask the estimate to be lower is just like making just making your stuff come late or, becoming a problem. And no one fusses when you come in too low. They only fuss if you come in too high. So there's always this pressure to come in faster and shorter. That's just it's kind of silly. Like you could change the requirements, you can split things up, you could, reassign new people or more people. I mean, those things they're all possible, but in general, yeah, like the estimate is the estimate for the, kind of statement of work. And so, trying to negotiate with it just doesn't work. But as I've become more and more of a person, trying to work with others, I will say I do find that sometimes people give me very, very low estimates, and I tried to tell them in general, don't. And someone was reading some commentary about this post as well. And someone was pointing out correctly that programmers naively think they're going to have like their high output, like peak output for how long would it take to solve this problem at peak output. But then we forget is how much of the day are you actually at peak output? Are you have to go to meetings, you're getting interrupted, you're helping code review other people's stuff. So there's this balance between like, yeah, focused time, it's this amount of hours, but you're not going to have all focused time. And additionally, you kind of often need to estimate calendar time, and your calendar time, you have a lot less than you think.
Yeah, I mean, the thing where I'm really struggling here right now is this idea that folks are much more like people really overestimate how fungible. I don't know if that's the right word, but like so for example, you talked about doing embedding and web and all of that. Very few people have that union of skills. And so if there's somebody who really knows embedded DSP and you're behind schedule on the website, you'll hear folks say, "Oh, well, just add this person to the website to get it done faster," and then it just never works out well because it just for so many reasons. I mean, one, the person doesn't want to build a website; they want to keep doing their DSP work. Two, it's like that person has to now get trained in that other skill, which takes time, and it's probably might be a good thing to do, but it's definitely not going to accelerate the schedule. And so I think that this is like a problem of we're in this sort of in between phase where everyone's still called a software engineer at a lot of companies, but I feel like that will probably change if it hasn't already. But yeah, that's another problem. It's like we have 8 people, just put all 8 people on this thing and it'll get done. It's like, well, it doesn't really work that way. My news story is announcing Python in Excel. So, we are predictors of the future, Patrick. Boom. We're basically amazing. So we talked about Excel months ago, 2 or 3 months ago, and talked about how it would be awesome if you could do Python or these other things in Excel. Sure enough, Microsoft, they must have been listening to Programming Throwdown. They announced Python in Excel. And actually, Guido is the first place I heard it from. He posted about it on Twitter, but it had also been on the news and everything. And it's pretty awesome. I think the way it works is it spins up and sort of like a ephemeral virtual environment to execute your functions and then spins it back down at the end, something like that. I don't know too much about the technical details, but it's definitely headed in the right direction. I think Python, is shaping up to be sort of the language of the masses, and this is a great way to get Python in the hands of millions and millions of people who, up until now, probably never even heard about it.
And I guess the reverse for people who know how to do Python to not be frustrated with, I don't understand how to get this Excel function to do what I want.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. If you need to, do like some real advanced stats stuff, you need SciPy, but you don't have any easy way to get in Excel. I wonder, all those companies that do kind of Excel Python, like there's one, I think it's called XBB, but there's these Excel, Python bindings that they sell commercially. Those people are probably not happy with this news. But I mean, I think for the overall community, it's a huge win.
If you've not watched it, I was watching it the other day because I was trying to do something with pivot tables. Don't ask. Anyways, there's a I don't know what to say famous. There's a classic. So Joel Spolsky, I think he used to be at Microsoft originally, founded Fog Creek Software. Like I feel like a few years ago, I don't hear that much about him anymore, but I feel like he was one of the sort of he had a big blog. Was that Joel on Software? I think.
Yeah, that's right, Joel on Software.
And he was like pushing for like developer productivity and like getting nice chairs and more monitors and like basically like treat your engineers kind of nice at a time when maybe that wasn't as common, or I don't say wasn't. It happens more now than it used to. And I feel like he was one of the people that pushed for that. Anyways, he has a YouTube video. You can kind of search up, "You Suck at Excel." And he sort of shows that actually like you can do a lot with Excel, like pivot tables or almost there's some VC people who say this is like every so often, I forget what the cadence is, that basically someone shows up with a startup that is basically could be solved with just a pivot table in Excel. And so, most people underestimate just how much you can do with just pasting all your data and running the functions on it.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, folks, definitely check that out and report back if you're using it. Let us know how you're using it.
Yeah, I want to see. I guess that's it needs to be imminently Googleable when I want to solve something. Someone to put like, here's the Python here. Here's the like 80% solution.
Yeah, that's right. There's been a lot of Discord in our Discord. So folks have been very active in Discord, which is really cool. So, generally we always say email us, but you can also go on the Discord and there's a whole community of people there, which is pretty neat.
We're not discourse. There's discourse on Discord.
Oh, you're right. Discord would be like disagreement, right?
Oh no.
There's Discord. There's harmony in Discord.
My next article is 7 Habits of Highly Effective Software Engineers. This is at the blog makingsmallercircles.com. And this is I don't know. It's one of those kind of like classic corporate things. If you ever like, if you're at a big company and they offer like sort of self-betterment training, you'll get the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it's things I don't know. Whenever I take these, I feel like it's things you kind of know. They're just like putting a catchy name on it. So like, highly effective people always look for win-win solutions. So don't compromise. You look for win-win ways for, what the person you're trying to reach agreement with makes them better and it makes you better. So it's just kind of like things that I feel are, I don't know, a little obvious, but they're helpful to have a framework and maybe they're, good. Anyways, so this person has 7 habits of highly effective software engineers, presumably riffing on that same thing. I don't know that I read them or not, but go read them. The first one is like actively prototype new ideas. And that one really, sort of resonates with me is I feel in general, it is difficult, but people sort of are unwilling to just commit to trying kind of like the hard bit. Well, first identifying the hard bit is not easy, but trying to like find some like core hard bit and like just write a little bit of code and convince yourself that your approach works or that, and like, maybe you throw it away, maybe you don't, but like tell yourself you kind of will throw it away. You're not trying to get it right. And then you're going to do it again. But also, try to bound it, try to make it small. And so I feel like this is one of those, things that people kind of miss out. So he has sort of, documentation about code reviews, just getting stuff done. So I feel like go read that. I won't read you all 7. I guess that's a spoiler. Then I'll steal traffic. So I won't. So go read that post.
Yeah. I mean, the one that really resonates to me right off the bat is a quick and timely code reviews. I remember when I was engineer, I would get so unbelievably frustrated when people would sit on a code review for weeks. That would just grind my gears more than anything else. And I think the reason why it happens is, at least I don't know if you're like this, Patrick. You might be more methodical, but I go through bursts where there will be like 2-3 weeks where I will just put an unbelievable amount of energy into whatever work thing I'm doing. And then I'll have a couple of weeks where, I honestly like won't work really that hard. And it averages out, so it works out well. But I'm a very bursty worker. And so when I'm in that, burst and someone just doesn't review a code, well, that basically cuts all that energy short. Like it's kind of wasted. And then, by the time they review it, now I'm like not that interested in it anymore. And so it's just what you end up with is not making any progress because of that, right? So that's one of the things to recognize is like when you're reviewing, that person just wrote that. They're probably like really into it. And so you might not be into it, but you have to at least pretend like you're into it for the code review.
Yeah, I think the bursty thing is part of it, but I think it works for the code reviewers too. Like I think I try to communicate to people like schedule time, at the end of the day or before you start your work, or just like something when you're out of focus to go do the code review so that, like you said, other people aren't kind of blocked. And then we also try to establish cultural things like how long is it like you can start like if no one reviews your code within 2 days, you can start pinging people and be like, hey, someone review my code. But don't start pinging them, like 30 minutes after you send it in and be like, hey, because, people are focused, they're doing stuff or they're at lunch or whatever. Like, that, you got to have reasonable, I guess on both sides. But yeah, try to sort of get to them. And then also, make sure that the team's culture like moves towards the ability to do code reviews. So not giant, 10,000 line changes that weren't communicated and are like deeply impactful to infrastructure. Those discussions should be settled beforehand. It is a pet peeve of mine that people try to sort of settle team strategy decisions in code review. It's just it's not good. That's not the right place to do it.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that took me many years to learn, I think I've said it on the show before, but it's worth repeating, is get really good at interactive Git rebasing and resetting and all of that. Because, I would, and this is part of the bursty thing, I would end up with like a 10,000 line code review. And, I didn't know that there was a way that I could break that apart. A simple way other than like a really painful thing where I was just, I don't know, copying and pasting from github.com or something. Like I just didn't have the technical fortitude to understand like, okay, here's some interactive way where I can break this change into like 20 different changes and test each one in isolation. So yeah, if you find yourself submitting huge peer reviews, don't do that. But like, but not just don't do that, like learn the techniques and the technology where you could break that down. All right, my next one is Raspberry Pi 5 begins shipping. So I have a Raspberry Pi 5 on back order. I have always done this ever since. Actually, I probably learned about Raspberry Pi from you, Patrick. I feel like you're the only person who would who I'd have the Raspberry Pi connection with. But ever since I got onto Raspberry Pi, I've been ordering them when they came out. And it takes forever to get to you, but it's the base price, that Raspberry Pi offers. You're not getting upcharged by anybody. So mine's coming sometime in December. That's what they say. But yeah, I ordered it. Apparently, it's way stronger than the 4 in terms of compute. So that'll be kind of interesting. I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet, but that's TBD. We'll have to figure it out.
I feel like it's been a little. I was mentioning to the Jason earlier when I saw that he had this up. I feel like it's been so sad to me that the Raspberry Pis went from like a really low barrier entry into some embedded stuff to scarce and hard to find. And it used to be like that when they would first come out, but then they would just be pretty ubiquitous. But the supply chain thing, they just never really sort of hit there. There's like this combination. I haven't looked into it. I think it's a combination of things, but it's sort of unfortunate that it's a little less accessible. You can't just go on Amazon and get a reasonably priced one these days. This is become very difficult. There's lots of cool things people have been doing, and like you mentioned, Jason, like hooking up to the I2C ports is something a lot of people, if you go on news articles or even myself, replace them with just getting older, like used enterprise mini PCs, which are probably more powerful and they can run Windows and stuff, but they don't have all that library for hardware interactivity. So the whole embedded stuff is not really workable there. If you just need something to be a NAS, well, you can probably do pretty good for yourself not using a Raspberry Pi. But for all those hardware embedded projects, like it's really the best sort of easy introduction to that. And it's just, I'm excited. The Raspberry Pi, I hope they sort of figure out the shortage. There's some stuff floating around too with these new Risk 5 boards, or Risk V. I don't know actually how you say it, but
I think it's
new
5. Yeah.
Is it 5? Okay. Risk 5 boards and stuff too. So I'm hopeful there'll be more in this like medium embedded space where it's running an OS, like Linux, but still has this like really nice hardware I2C SPI, connect a little monitor to it. I think it's a great space.
Yeah, totally. One thing I'm surprised is that unlike Arduino, which is just full of aftermarket, versions, like you can get an Elegoo Arduino Uno, or like there's a million different companies that are making just following the spec. In the case of Raspberry Pi, there's really nobody who there's no company producing Raspberry Pis, at least that I know of, much cheaper.
I mean, I think it's the SoC. So the Arduino used a pretty ubiquitous chip for its processor. It was like I think a PIC. Anyways, made by Microchip or whatever. So it was like a very like common piece. But I think the Raspberry Pi, the like processor, which is part of why it was so cheap, whatever, is just sort of, they did all the integration work, but it was a basically relatively hard to get piece, and they managed to negotiate like a good price for it or whatever, which is the actual processor that it's running. And so I haven't looked at the 5 yet, but I kind of assume it's the same thing. It's like economies of scale, and it's like not a ubiquitous piece. And so the combination makes it a little hard to duplicate.
Yeah, that makes sense. I do also have an Intel NUC, which is, a mini PC, and that's running my NAS and all of that. And that is amazing. I had some issue where it wouldn't detect my hard drive every now and then. I updated the BIOS just as a Hail Mary before buying another one and just saying we're done. But actually updating the BIOS fixed it. So it was a Hail Mary pass that actually got a touchdown, I guess.
Did you try swapping the SATA cables?
No. No, that would be, oh my gosh, I broke 2 SATA cables. This one, though, the hard drive just plugs right into the NUC, so I think we're okay. Yeah, actually, a lot of weird, really esoteric hardware issues lately. That seems to be the October trend for me. But yeah, mini PCs are amazing. Highly recommend them. Really fun. They're so cheap now. Intel was selling them half off for the Amazon Prime Day. I don't know what they are now, but prices are very reasonable.
There's also, you mentioned AliExpress before. I have seen an uptick in the number of like, I don't know what you call them, like smaller brands. They're just brands you would never recognize selling kind of like old Intel Atom chips, or even Celerons, or those kinds of things in that sort of mini PC form factor, or even fanless. Not really, again, competing for like the hardware embedded stuff, which Raspberry Pi is. Again, if you want to do any of that, definitely go Raspberry Pi or Arduino. But yeah, for that sort of like NAS, like home networking kind of stuff, yeah, there's some pretty cool options now, and like ones that are like USB-C powered, and
oh wow,
so yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's super neat.
Book of
all
the
right,
show.
time for book of the show. What's your book, Patrick?
Oh man, you did the good intro, and I cut it short. Okay, all right. My book of the show is an old one, but I've been going back through it. My kids are getting old enough, whatever. So we've been going through which is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, but the illustrated edition. At some point, one of our family members picked this up. Which is a nice big book, like not thick, like the Harry Potter books are thick, but this is like wide, like tall and wide, which is just a nice form factor, and it has just beautiful illustrations in it. And so I feel like it's just one of those things, everyone begs to be able to see the page instead of just reading it. So I've been really, really enjoying that. Maybe it's a bit of a cop out, but that's what I have. Reading time's been a little limited, so I'm going way in the Wayback Machine to pull up this one. But yeah, it does have a recommended if you weren't aware that they have illustrated editions, or if you have, I guess there's an XKCD comic about that, like how many people are born each year, thus if you say like, 7, 8, 9, before you can kind of start getting kids into Harry Potter, like there's, millions of kids who sort of coming into that. So if you have one of those in your life,
wow,
your own kid, or, somebody, anyways, I'm looking for a gift idea, shout out to this. Or if you've never read the series yourself, I mean, I don't think everyone on earth has read, maybe nearly, but not everyone. So if you've not read it before, this is a great way to get into that.
Very cool. Yeah, I haven't read the illustrated edition of this, but I've read the illustrated edition of Terry Pratchett, The
Okay.
Color of Magic, and yeah, I'd also read the original Color of Magic. Yeah, the illustrated edition is amazing. It's similar to what you said. It's a very like wide, tall book, and has a lot of beautiful illustrations. It's a lot of fun. My book of the show is actually a show of the show. It's the Pete and Sebastian show, which is another podcast. There's been so much negativity, and I mean, I know this is almost becoming itself a stereotype, but there's just so much negativity on the news that I just felt like I needed, something. I basically needed something funny, some comedy, something positive and funny, and where I knew that they weren't going to talk about the news. So if you don't want to hear about the news, you should listen to Programming Throwdown. But after you've heard Programming Throwdown, if you still don't want to hear about the news, you should listen to the Pete and Sebastian show. Those guys are hilarious. They're right around our age. So, they don't really, I don't know if that matters that much, but, some of the references, are of our era. So that part of it is kind of nice too. But, they're really funny. They riff on each other pretty well. And, it's just like some nice banter to listen
What
while
kind of
you're
show is it?
working. It's basically it's just a comedy show. So what they'll do is they'll show up with 3 or 4 topics. So for example, in the last episode I saw, one of the topic was basically vermin getting into their property. So like raccoons getting, into their backyard and things like that, and the way they deal with it, and the pest control guy, and how does someone get into that career, and just it's hilarious. I was just dying laughing. They also, they're comedians. So they have a very infectious laugh. I think that's almost par for the course to be a comedian. It's it's a riot. Highly recommend it. There's a bunch of really good comedy podcasts. I'm sure I didn't stumble on the only one, but I'm really enjoying this one. And you can definitely follow them on Patreon, but only after you subscribe to our Patreon. So go to patreon.com/programming throwdown and please sponsor us, support us. We really do appreciate it. We take that money and ultimately put it to getting more folks to learn about programming. And we're going to take some of it, whatever we have left over, and use it for gifts on the Christmas raffle, which is something we do every year, and it's coming up in a couple of months. So we try and give all of it back to the community, or we do give all of it back to the community in some way, shape, or form. And we try and use it as best we can to get more folks into programming. And we really appreciate your support on that.
I'm going to try to do it Jason style. It is time for Tool of the Show.
That's amazing. What's your tool of the show, Patrick?
My tool of the show is Obsidian, which is you can find at obsidian.md. This is I guess you call it a note-taking app, but it's sort of, there's a collection of these. I think there's one called Notion, there's Obsidian, and they have phone apps, but also desktop apps. It's sort of your ability to sort of take notes for yourself, but not just a singular note, multiple notes, but also provide links between them, categorize them, and just sort of like organize your sort of thoughts. I think I've talked about Google Keep before. Google Keep works pretty well too, but this one is a little bit better for sort of hierarchy and interlinking. And then there's a bunch of, sort of community provided plugins. They do sell a way to synchronize across your devices, but you can also provide your own synchronization. And the nice thing about Obsidian is it's all just text files. So each note is a file, and each file is a markdown text file. So that's sort of its strength, and I guess maybe a little bit its weakness. So rather than a lot of companies will do a proprietary database or even like a SQLite database, it's a little harder here if the company shuts down. It's not open source, at least I don't think it's open source, but if the company shuts down, you just have like a directory of text files, so it'd be very straightforward for you to recover that, to import it into something else. I know it just feels like if you're going to get invested in something that you're wanting to use, I feel like it's a really nice take on it. And having something I've been trying to sort of follow, there's a lot of techniques have built up around sort of this organization, like life operating system. And like, there's like a lot of these, and I've been trying to sort of get into it. People point out it becomes a trap where you like start trying to like get over organized, and making notes itself becomes like a hobby as opposed to just a facilitating your thing. So I don't know. I find it very intriguing. I feel like I have this constant to-do list that is in my head, and getting more organized is one of those things. So I've been trying out this Obsidian on my phone and then on my desktop as well, as a way to sort of take notes about what I'm doing, provide like topics, but also link to other notes. And so I've been enjoying it. Check it out, Obsidian at obsidian.md.
Very cool. Yeah. So I just looked it up. Obsidian is not open source, but you were saying you could sync it like with Google Drive or something?
Yeah, so like I use an iPhone, so I am able to use iCloud and just like the directory. And there's some warnings, to be sure. Like you got to be a little careful. But I, for instance, can't think of an example where I would be editing on my phone and my desktop at the same time. This is only for me. So the sort of synchronization should be pretty straightforward. They do offer like a sort of it's not very expensive, a monthly fee if you want to sort of support the developer, but also enable like proper full featured syncing, which can work. But yeah, again, the thing I like is just that you can see it. You can just open it with Notepad or whatever, or VI, point it at the folder, and you can totally see all of your markdown.
Yeah, that is awesome. That is really cool. I was using Workflowy for a while. But yeah, like, kind of like what you said, I found myself spending more time writing things in Workflowy. I ended up switching to, when I got this Remarkable, I ended up switching to just writing everything on the tablet. But yeah, I do think having the right note-taking app is really important. It kind of reduces that cognitive load we were just talking about. Because once you write it down, it doesn't have to be in your head anymore, as long as you're willing to look at it every now and then. My tool of the show is Ink by Inkle. So, I've talked about, actually, I think Patrick, you talked about the 80 days, or maybe I've always been the one. Anyways, Inkle is this company that makes a bunch of interactive fiction books. There's, I think it's called 80 Days Around the World.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then there's Overboard, which is by the same company. And a bunch of folks, so they released their, I don't want to say engine, but they're basically system for creating these text-based games, and it has like a nice markup and everything. They open sourced it, and it's a scripting language, is what they call it. It has like a nice template style where you can kind of Mad Lib different things into it. And the reason this came up was, I guess people have been porting it to other game engines. So they recently ported it to Unreal. I think someone's working on a port to Godot, or getting it to compile with Godot. But yeah, I thought that was pretty neat. It looks really fun. If you want to create an interactive game similar to the ones that Inkle has made, definitely check it out. I think it's a really neat tool.
Oh, very cool. All right. Something else getting pushed into my queue. Okay.
It goes on your Obsidian.
Yeah, hang on. I'm going to write it down. I'm going to link. All right. I think with that, it is time to talk about our topic of the show, which is Godot.
Yeah, Patrick. So you haven't tried Godot yet, right?
No, I haven't written. I've kind of watched the tutorials, read the stuff. I'm familiar with the system, been tracking it for quite a while. But yeah, writing a game in Godot is like, again, one of those things in my queue. I haven't managed to pop it out just yet.
Yeah, I mean, my experience with Godot was, I had this AI hero game that I talked about on an earlier episode. And originally that was written in Phaser, which was a JavaScript library. And Phaser, I guess Phaser is technically a game engine, but the thing about Phaser is, it basically gives you all the libraries. Like, here's a graphics library, here's a physics library, but you still have to kind of code all the game up yourself. And where I got stuck was on the sort of way to be an efficient game development, engineer. Like, for example, imagine if you had a bug at the boss of your game. And the only way you could fix the bug is by playing through the entire game, getting to the boss, and then trying to recreate the bug. Well, it'd be super frustrating, right? It'd take you hours and hours to encounter the bug and all of that. Now that's a pretty, extreme example. But, if you break that down, you can kind of end up in a situation where it's really time consuming and difficult to debug anything. And actually, even more than debugging, you really have to, friend put it really nicely, find the fun, right? When you first make a game, unless you're just reskinning another game and you're keeping the mechanics identical, when you create a game, originally it's not very fun. At least none of the ones I made were very fun. And for AI Hero, the original concept of the game was where where you would sort of bring your own shapes. Like it's like, oh, I need a circle here. Oh, I need a line here. I need a curve here, and you'd sort of draw from this toolbox of shapes. And that ended up not being very fun because if you got it wrong, it was really frustrating. Or like often the more complex shape, like a curve could do anything a line could do, right? So you just always pick the curve. And it got to this point where it wasn't very fun, and I couldn't really iterate quickly because of what we just talked about, and so I got stuck, and so I put it down. When I ported it to Godot, obviously it still wasn't fun because I just straight ported it to Godot exactly as it was, but I could, and we'll talk about this when we talk about Godot, but I could go into specific parts of the puzzle and just play that part in isolation, or just look at a certain curve in isolation and play around with it. And eventually that was what allowed me to find the fun in that game. So that was my experience with Godot, and overall I'm a big fan.
I think game engines, and maybe it sort of changed today, but I think like this example, like you're saying, Jason, there's nothing that could have, like you're a capable programmer, you could have coded all of this yourself, right? So the things we're going to talk about that are like the components of a game engine, it's really like almost like a menu, and many game engines are pretty flexible in that they like let you order stuff off the menu, but you can also kind of like sub in your own thing. And I think some people get into, and you kind of see postmortems or whatever, get into their own, like, I'm just going to build my own game engine, or I'm building something so different or so off nominal, like the expected path, that I'm going to start by building my game engine, and they just never finish building the game engine.
Yep.
And you just sort of get into this, sort of thing. And I think like, it's like programming language choice in a way, which is that, probably there are many ways to solve it. And for every person in every situation, it's just going to be, going to pick one and hope for the best. But I think like starting with that basic game loop, right? Where unlike most applications, or at least that I write, they sort of start, they do some processing, and then they end. That's not how a game works. A game doesn't, I mean, I guess at some high level, you exit the game, but you get into this loop, right? And so just setting up the loop and forcing, like you were saying, to get into the process of rapidly testing and getting to the part where you have a sort of working prototype somewhat as quickly as possible also helps with the motivation. And I think that gets underestimated, that like having something that's a demoable and playable and sort of excites you helps you stick with it.
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, think about like some of the really iconic games, so I'm going to sort of date myself here, but like Super Mario 3, for example, on Nintendo, there was one level where you got this boot, and the boot would let you walk over spikes. You could jump really high. You could like step on things and kill them that, you couldn't without the boot. It just radically changed the game. And there was only one level where you had the boot, and that level was kind of designed around the boot. There's just a lot of spikes that you wouldn't be able to survive otherwise and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I mean, the game developers and designers, they had an idea and they tested that idea and they built a whole level around that idea. And then when you fast forward to modern Mario games, I play, what is it called? The one on the Switch where 4 people could play and
Super
only one
Mario
person
3D.
needs to win. Oh yeah, that's right. Super Mario 3D. What I find when I play these games is basically almost every level kind of has some kind of trick to it or something kind of unique. Like one level will have, platforms that flip over when you jump on them. Another level will have, something else. And so you have to be able to test all these concepts independently and very quickly. And game engines are really, really good at doing that.
I think we talked about Unity briefly before, but since then I've read The Masters of Doom, which I think we had at a book show before, which is basically how John Romero and John Carmack kind of started their game studio and how they sort of evolved it. And, I think one of the things through that sort of impacted me is the sort of separation of concerns, I guess you'll call it, which is John Romero just had this ability to create levels and interesting mechanics, like you were saying. And John Carmack would focus, I hope I'm getting this right. I think I'm getting it right. John Carmack
you're
would
right.
focus like very specifically on like at the time the limited hardware, right? And sort of saying, how do I optimize rendering a 3D scene? So think about like Wolfenstein 3D or eventually Doom. Like how do I get the levels encoded, textured, blitted onto the screen so that John Carmack can kind of push the engine and sort of work the fun. And I think, talking about, we're talking about Godot here, I think it tries to give you that same separation of concern. Let you focus on the half of creating with the tools, like Jason is saying, the mechanics and the interesting bits is the part that they're not really going to be able to provide you. That you got to bring that yourself.
Yeah, and getting to what you were saying earlier, just circling back to that, I go to a lot of video game development meetups. Like if you're in Austin and you're at one of these, you'll probably run into me at some point. And a lot of the time I see people who have a really interesting game engine, but then there's no fun. There's no fun there. So for example, I saw one recently where it was like Minecraft. The engine was like Minecraft where it's all voxels. Um, but you had a grappling hook, kind of like Spider-Man's web fingers, right? So you could swing around the level. And then you also had these rockets that could just blow big craters in the level. And with the two of them, you could actually, dig tunnels or dig up from the ground. And it was like a joy to swing around the levels and put holes in the ground. But it was just an engine, right? Like there was no fun there. And I think that, it might be better to have, let's say, built that in Godot, even if you're getting, 5 frames per second or something. But like you could figure out what the fun is, like what can I add to this game to make it really fun? And then, if you have to rewrite it, it's fine because at that point you've done the rapid prototyping and you've sort of found the fun and now you just have to recode it. It's probably better to do that and end up with 2 copies of your game than to start building your own engine.
So maybe that's a good segue, or at least I'll force it, is like what game engine is, and then specifically Godot's kind of version. I think talking generically, I already mentioned the sort of loop, the sort of execution loop. And in that, you're going to have stages. And one of those stages is going to be input handling, which, yes, everyone could write themselves, but you really don't want to, which is how do you handle keyboard input, multiple keys pressed down at the same time, mouse input, clicks, and all of that kind of like input handling, as well as like just some of the stuff that, hey, you want to make a menu on the screen. We talked about, I think that was last time, right? About desktop UIs, and we were alluding to game UIs, but you really don't want to write a windowing system or a menu system, from scratch. And so they're going to bring that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, totally. And they're going to do it in a way that is cross-platform. So, in my case, when I used the JavaScript game engine, they had a way of running it on the phone. And this is a little bit beyond me, so I'm not going to try and explain how that works. But and then when I switched to Godot, that was one of the things that I really wanted to make sure, because although I was playtesting and developing on my computer, my intent was for almost everybody to play this on their phone. And so, similar to if you're doing Raspberry Pi or Arduino stuff, you have to kind of cross compile, right? And you have to make whatever you're doing work in that other architecture. And there could be all sorts of little nits there. And so with, Godot has this nice way of saying, okay, you can use your mouse on your computer or you can use the touchscreen on your phone. And they've sort of like have one API that can kind of handle all of that.
I didn't even think about that. So
yeah,
I guess we've been dodging the big one though, which is also just the actual kind of rendering engine, which I think is what probably most people think about first as the thing they don't want to go solve themselves.
right.
No one wants to write directly in OpenGL, although you can. And now I guess that story again to your cross-platform and portability is probably a bit of a different story with DirectX and OpenGL and shaders, and so they're going to provide that ability to push 3D or 2D assets, which would be like sprites, particle effects, models that you load, or sprite sheets if you're doing sort of sprays, and push those through, and then handling things like rigging and animation. And they're going to have sort of file formats worked out, and even in the case of Godot, like editors for that stuff as well. So not just, oh, I'm in a script file, like writing all this stuff by hand, which may work, but how would you join with someone else who wants to contribute to your game and say, hey, listen, like, why don't you handle tweaking the run animation? And here's the editor and here's the keyframes, and allow you to figure out that kind of stuff.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I honestly, to this day, have no idea how the hardware, graphics acceleration stuff works on Android or iOS. I don't know if they both use the same thing or if there's two different ones, and Godot had to write everything twice. I mean, the Godot system or Unity or any of these is handling all of that for you. So you run it on your computer, which it could even be OpenGL or DirectX. I don't know that either because Godot is handling all of that. And then when you run it on the phone, it just works. And they've done their best to make sure you get exactly the same experience on all these different devices, which is actually really remarkable if you think about it. Another piece of this is the editor. The editor is extremely important. Phaser and these other game engines, they don't have a development environment. They're a set of libraries, and you're meant to write your game in them. But Godot comes with a editor. The editor is also written in Godot, which is kind of interesting. It shows that it actually works for something. But the editor is beautiful, and you drag and drop different sprites or sounds, and it'll do positional audio and all of that. And then you can also do so the editor gives you scenes. So for example, one of my scenes in my game is the main menu, and there's a bunch of little boxes, like hit boxes that you could click on for the different options of the menu and all of that. But then they have the scenes are recursive. So you can actually, for example, each level of my game had a scene for each line. So the point of the game is you're drawing these lines to kind of separate different groups of dots, and each line is a sub scene. And so you can actually drill into the line scene, and you can manipulate a single line. And when you click the button, it should grow a little bit to like acknowledge that you've tapped the button and everything. And you can test all of that in isolation very, very quickly. And then when you are comfortable, then you can spiral back out and test the larger scene. There's some things you'll have to contend with. So for example, if you're testing the line scene by itself, then you've never loaded a level. And so if like one of the issues I ran into was when I'm testing the line scene, I would drag the line and then it would crash because it would see, oh, did the player solve the level with where the line is now? And there is no level. So you have to deal with that. But what you get in exchange is the ability to test each of these different components. And I found that to be really the thing that got the game across the finish line.
So other things that I think tie in with editor are, as Jason's already mentioning with the scenes, but often many games have levels. And for levels, you need some sort of map or, sort of environment. And so having the ability to do that is something I remember what was that? I guess that was like Unreal Tournament or something way back in the day, came with, or no, it was even Half-Life. I remember had an editor, and you could download the editor and you could like make your own Half-Life levels.
It's called like Hammer or something.
I don't remember. I'll have to look it up now. But people started shipping that, hey, listen, like anyone can kind of create their own level here. And it's just a way of defining it. But again, this is something that sort of, I guess I overused the Python thing, batteries included, that when you want to go build a level, here's a way to allow others to build levels for your game. So if you're, building a logic puzzler, or Jason was just mentioning the Inkle stuff, and sort of like, hey, they built a robust way for even others to reuse their approach. And so being able to kind of have the level editing and sort of either 2D or 3D sort of be included is a good separation of concerns to allow other people to build out those pieces while you're focusing on maybe some of the mechanics.
Yeah, totally. It was Valve's Hammer editor. And I remember playing with that too. That was a blast. Another one I played a lot with was the StarCraft editor. StarCraft 1 had this amazing editor. And you could actually take the maps you made and play them with your friends on Battle.net, and they would download the map from you and they join the game and everything. But yeah, there is nothing more demotivating than like, you edit a JSON file and then it takes like 3 minutes to compile, and then you join, you start the game, you have to click new game, you have to choose your character, you do all that. You have to like skip to the right level, and then, the JSON file was wrong, the level is like unplayable, and you have to do the whole thing over again, right? And so, when people say they're going to build their own game engine, I think a lot of them think about, what do I want the engine to do, to render or to play? Like, what do I want the engine to do for the player? That's usually what people think about. But what you really need to think about is, what can the engine do for me to make me as a developer, 100x more productive, especially if you're a solo or a small group, or you're doing one of these game jams where you only have 3 days. You really need the editor to do so much for you.
I think I just put two and two together. Maybe I'm wrong. I'd have to look. I think there's been like a uprising, resurgence, increase in people doing procedural games. In part, we should talk about that. We have that perpetually on our list. But something like wave function collapse and other Perlin noise and these kinds of things for doing procedural generation. You mentioned Minecraft, right? Kind of famously does this, but other even more elaborate games as well, trying to sort of do every game is unique, are a little different, but there's rules that are obeyed to make sure it's sort of still playable. And I think some of that, not all of it, of course, very fun game mechanic, right? And sort of almost adds that infinite replayability if you can make it fun, but also gets you out of having to build levels, right? So I think there's this temptation too for some of those games to say, well, look, I don't have to sit down and design a fun level. Like, I'm just going to work on an algorithm. And if it's not fun, the person will just regenerate, the world, or we'll just do something again. And it's, I think can be, not always, but I think it can start to be a little bit of a crutch, because someone just saying like, hey, it's kind of more fun to work on an algorithm to make levels than to actually sit down and make levels. If you're sort of a programmer by trade or by inclination, some of that sort of artistic crafting and designing the sort of perfect one. And I think that's interesting. We were talking about, I think I mentioned last episode or 2 episodes ago about Factorio, but interesting. I was thinking about this. There's another game, Satisfactory, which is sort of similar to Factorio. And interestingly, in Satisfactory, the game, the map is actually static. So they have one map, and they've sort of over time, they want to add new features. And so they have to like tell you, hey, when we do this upgrade, this portion of the map, warning, like if you're building something elaborate here, you won't really be able to upgrade because this portion is going to change. Like, we want to change this portion of the map. Versus something like, Factorio or whatever, like you're playing on your, seed, you're playing on your specific incarnation. So stuff can be added, but you wouldn't really see it unless you regenerated. So same like Minecraft, if Minecraft added a new biome, right? Like you wouldn't see that new biome unless you sort of regenerated. And so there's this interesting dichotomy between like a static map and, designed and procedurally generated one.
Yeah, totally. I think that there's this, it's another one of these traps, kind of like building your own engine. But there's this trap where you think that, oh, I'm going to make a sandbox, I think is what they're called. I'm going to make a sandbox game where I'm just going to throw a bunch of mechanics together. And that way I get to do all the fun stuff without having to do things that I think is not very fun, like designing levels or having very scripted situations, right? And actually, it's really, really, really hard to make a sandbox game. There's a few of them. Um, they've gotten kind of a cult following. I mean, other than Minecraft. I mean, Minecraft is kind of like the Michael Jordan or the Beatles or whatever. Where it's kind of like its own entity, right? But if you take away Minecraft, the sandbox games like X4, for example, or
Gary's mod.
Gary's mod's a good one. A lot of them, they're just very hard to pull off. And so I would suggest to folks who are making their first game, make something that has like pretty well defined levels where you can just reduce the scope. It turns out making things more complex is very easy. But making things fun is very, like, for example, in Mario, what I think, we're getting into sort of like really subjective territory here. But I think what's fun about Mario is that you have all these very simple systems. Like the Goomba is very simple. The little like fireball that spins, what do you call that thing? You know what I'm talking about? The little wall of fire no, it's not a ball.
Oh, the rotating arm of fireballs?
Yeah, the rotating arm of fireballs. So all of these things.
All the speedrunners are really mad at us right now.
Yeah, I know. We're going to get email. There's going to be Discord over this. In isolation, they're trivial, right? In isolation, they're trivial to overcome. But it's when you compose them in different ways that it becomes really interesting. And so start with something really simple. Everyone says this. I'm not inventing something new here, but start with something simple that's very scripted, and then work your way up by adding more and more complex systems. And again, like a library, a tool chain like Godot is really important for that.
I don't know, while we're on subjective game dev advice, having never built a game, I would say I think one of the things too, but I guess cross-pollinating from other stuff, is don't set out to build your dream game first. I mean, that does work. There are stories, you can Google them, about people who like their very first game was successful and amazing or whatever. But I think much more common, like set your sights on something like attainable. You can kind of iterate on the dream game, the fantasy game, the one day I'm going to build this. But for now, sort of just execute on sort of what's in your scope to finish, and get sort of the reps in of start to end, and actually sort of, it doesn't have to be amazing, or you don't have to send it to anyone, but just like complete and playable, and have a beginning and a middle and an end. And Jason mentioned game jams, but this is my like secret thing, is like one day I'm gonna sign up for a game jam. It's gonna force me to do this. Like, it's time bound.
We need to do it, Patrick.
Oh no,
we need to do it. We got to take like 3 days off work when there's a game jam and make a game.
All right, I got to do practice before that. But all right,
a line is drawn.
Trying to get back onto Godot. Physics we didn't talk about as well. This is another one where maybe people either think it's too easy or too hard, but having a physics engine and not worrying about all the things that come with it, collision detection,
right,
gravity, adding, parameters that you can script to other functions or actions or superpowers, like Jason mentioned, having a boot that turns off the spikes, right? Like, you want to code all that logic with a, spaghetti function? Good luck. Like, yeah, you could do that, or you could let a system that sort of has all those things, handle it for you.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that's really complicated is, look at Mario, for example. Certain things are affected by physics, like the mushroom falling off the edge of a ledge or something, right? But then, there's certain things where you just need a lot more control. Like if Mario is controlled by a physics engine, it would be just too unreliable. And, obviously speedrunners would be really upset. It's like, oh, my computer, skipped a frame and Mario couldn't make that jump or something. But then also, like, it would just be too complicated for beginner players to really understand, So you need Mario where when you jump, he has an extremely fixed trajectory. And he could even change trajectory in midair and things that are like physically unplausible. But then you need, mushrooms and barrels and stuff that are just normal physics things. And so, Godot has, I'm not going to get the terminology right, but it basically has a concept for, I think they call it a static dynamic body or something. I don't remember. Anyways, but there's a concept for like, here's a thing that I want to exist in my physics universe, but I'm going to be controlling it directly. And you'd use that for something like a player. I think it's called a kinematic body. And then they have dynamic bodies. So you could just use little circles, to represent the mushrooms and the barrels and everything. And they handle like what happens when one type of body bounces off another one. Because that's another issue is like, what if you who have like total control over Mario, let's say there's some like a barrel and Mario pushes the barrel against the wall. What happens is that barrel gets squeezed and then explode, like you see in physics engines, go flying, or does Mario stop moving? Like there's all this complexity, and the game engine, will really help you navigate all of that.
Talking about barrels and pushing and this, I think also, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I was telling Jez, this is one of those things that pops up with Discord, not in our Discord, just in general, which is entity component systems. They're like one of those game development philosophies. So I think Godot, Jason mentioned scenes and the sort of hierarchy, but I think Godot famously does not sort of natively push the entity component system, which is one way of handling what we're talking about, which is, hey, you have all these things moving around. You have enemies and you have, rotating fire flame arms and swords and pickups. And all of these things need to be sort of tracked, inventories and what's in your backpack. And, all of these things, need to be handled, rendered, updated every frame. And so it becomes a place to sort of, be rigorous in how you're going to not handle each specific object uniquely, but handle sort of all objects collectively in a common way and have a common thing. And so the entity component system approach, I'm going to see if I can get this right. So entities are roughly sort of IDs into the world. So rather than everything being a pointer, you give everything a unique ID so that the system can refer to other IDs and do things like, garbage collection off frame, or phasing them out, or changing them between levels. And so entities and then the component is sort of like the thing in the sort of inheritance hierarchy. It's like, it is an object, it has properties and attributes that you can add, and they can be common across. Like this is a barrel. Do you want barrels to be destroyable or not? So does it have a destroyable attribute or it's not? Is it squishy or is it rigid or not rigid? I guess there we go. And then the system is the thing that runs it, right? It hooks up all of the calls that need to be routed between each other and does the updates and sort of flows everything through. And it's a way of modeling this that the other places take. I think there's some sort of extensions to Godot that will allow you to implement this. It's not a game engine unique thing. You could develop other code that uses the same kind of logic, but this is just one of the things some game engines use. And then Godot uses sort of a hierarchy instead through sort of inheritance to show some of this, and sort of a more, I think, am I sort of on the right track?
Yeah, no, you're nailing it.
Yeah. Okay, good. But this is one of those trade-offs that your game engine, I think it's a little bit, I described it like a menu, which sort of like, it may bring its own approach. It doesn't prevent you from using something different and really going in sort of the ECS, the entity component system. But it's sort of out of the box. It's not going to kind of do all that piping for you. And this is one of those, people will go opine for long blog posts about the pros or cons of such an approach.
Yeah, I mean, one thing where I tried to make a game a long time ago, just in C++ from scratch. I tried to write my own game engine. It was not smart. But to be fair, it was a text-based. It was like one of these rogue type games where I didn't need a lot of graphics. But one of the things that really tripped me up back then was circular references. Like if I have a sword, then like the person has the sword's attached to the person. And just like how do you break that reference elegantly? Like, for example, what if you have a sword that is like a magical sword that disappears after 10 seconds, like it's part of a spell, right? And like as you're swinging the sword, the 10 seconds are up. Like there's weird things like that where like, oh, the sword disappeared, but now like, you'd already committed to swinging the sword. So you get these weird effects, right? Um, and one thing Godot does is it has this like type of queuing system where you queue an object to be freed, but it kind of keeps it around for a little bit longer just to make sure that you don't have this sort of so it's a form of deadlock in a way, sort of deadlock issue. And that fixed a variety of issues I had, especially when I was changing levels in AI Hero and I was trying to like tear everything down. Um, with Godot, it just kind of like took care of all of that for me. But I know in past projects, I've had a bunch of issues where even MameHub crashes on exit, and I still don't know how to fix it. So it kind of alleviates all of those issues for you of dealing with C++ pointer nastiness.
Speaking of C++, we haven't said, so Godot programming languages. Do you want to take that to review?
Yeah. Good call, man. So Godot uses something called GDScript. Have you seen this, Patrick?
Yes.
Yeah, it's very similar to Python. There's just a few tiny differences, but yeah, I found it very approachable. In the beginning, I didn't want to have to learn another language, to be honest. So I thought, let me try Godot with the C#. There is they call it Godot Mono. But that was just plagued with issues. I mean, it was brand new when I was trying it out. This was Godot 3. And I just had so many technical issues. I was like, there's not that much code in AI Hero. Let me just try out this Godot script. And I'm so glad I did. I mean, it took almost no time to learn. There's just a few like really subtle differences. Like I think, in Python you use enumerate when you want to get a so if you want to do a for loop over a list of objects, but you also need the index, so you need the object and its index at the same time. In Python, you do like for x in enumerate my list, right? I think Godot it's something different, but it's like these kind of really minor things. And in exchange, it was such a better developer experience. Now I think the C# is getting much more mature.
I think you can also do stuff in C++ as well. So I think C++, C#, GDScript, those are kind of the core ones. And then I think there are, like in general bindings for other stuff if you kind of want to, but you sort of start to leave I know there's like some core functionality you want to kind of stay in if you don't know that you need to specifically do something or you're on a quest. You want to stay in kind of one of those. So the other thing that we alluded to, like I mentioned when we were talking about entity component systems, are the sort of plugins. But I think another thing a game engine gets you is, again, this like core functionality being there and offering stuff is you can go get other libraries to do things for you. So we've talked about that when we talked about Unity, and they have sort of the marketplace as all this like, paid and free sort of extensions. Godot has something similar. So there's things that you can go grab and just add in that you really wouldn't want to do from scratch. So you want to show ads. What kind of ads you want to show? Like little banner ads or
right.
like you're going to get all of that for you. Or, please, I don't even want to go down, never had to do it myself, but like you want to offer unlocks or, in-app purchases or do a, please don't, freemium game that has microtransactions. Like you really want to code up all that stuff by yourself? Like, so
yeah, I mean, talking to all these different services, because you have to talk to the Google service for Android and the iOS service for Apple. So you will have to at least code it twice, and it's probably going to be very painful. Godot just handles it.
What is the in-app equivalent for PC? Is there one? I don't actually know. Like, is there like
DLC? Right?
Is okay. So like you would just like Steam app or through like I don't know like how would okay.
Yeah, it's a good. So okay, there's two types of microtransactions, right? There's DLC, and then there's kind of like buying, I guess like cosmetic stuff or buying like advancement in the game, right? That second one, I really don't know what your options are for PC. But the first one would definitely be DLC. Like you could say, like Polytopia is a good example where you have to buy the different races, to play them, and it kind of like unlocks a bit more of the game. And in Steam, you just make each race a DLC and buy it through there.
Godot, when it was early, was a lot of tutorials and stuff for platformers and sort of like, I guess basic phone games, the sort of casual games, I guess like 2D stuff. But I think that was what you were describing, sort of your game to AI Heroes is sort of like, but recently they've been working pretty hard to become more fully featured as like a 3D game engine as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any experience with it, but or Unity that matter. I haven't done a lot of 3D stuff in a long time, but yeah, I think Godot is trying to be really feature complete with Unity and Unreal and those alternatives, which is great. My personal advice, I wouldn't start with a 3D game. There, people will say there's advantages, like if you have a 3D mesh, it doesn't have to look as detailed as a 2D sprite. Like you could basically get away with a lot more on the art side. I don't know. I'm a little skeptical of that, to be honest. I feel like you could have pretty low quality art even in 2D if you have a solid game hook. So yeah, I would definitely start with 2D. But Godot, the thing about Godot is, if you do eventually want to get a career in gaming, or you have a vision for a 3D game and you want to build yourself up to it, you could do the whole thing. You could build yourself up in Godot and know that it'll support your 3D game that you want to build. Getting back to your component system, something that really struck me that took a while for me to get used to is there's no like main function. Like there's no entry point. So the way it works is you attach functions to individual entities. So like I attach this function to like, let's just use Mario as an example. So you'd actually attach code to a Goomba, and that code would say like every tick, move left until I hit a wall, then move right. And you would like actually just attach that code to the Goomba and it just floats in isolation. And you could attach that same code to the turtle. And you could even say in that code, like 90% of it's the same, but you could even have a clause saying like, if turtle, then like let Mario turn me into like from a living turtle to a shell or whatever. But so you could do some sharing and stuff, but it's not like a traditional program where you start with main and then you set up some things and then you have a for loop that loops through all your characters. Like there's none of that. Like you're writing like little tiny snippets of code and you're relying on the engine to systematize all of that. That was something that took a ton of getting used to, and writing code that was not garbage in that way was actually took a lot of practice. But I also, once I got used to it, I really enjoyed it. I like the fact that I could just like create a new thing, give it some code, and it could just live in the existing universe. That part of it was really exciting.
Well, being the one of the two of us that have actually written a game in Godot, all right, you got to give it a rating.
Yeah, so I've tried Unity, I've tried Phaser and a bunch of these. I definitely give Godot an A+. I really loved it. I didn't make any money off my game. My game's totally free. There's no in-app purchase or anything. But if I did, I would give all that money to Godot. They deserve it. So the Godot gets 100% of the proceeds from
100% of zero. Such a philanthropist, Jason. Such a philanthropist.
I was really, really impressed. Honestly, I think if you're getting started, this is unquestionably the way to go. I think that Godot is open source, totally open source. You can fork it, you can make changes to it. I mean, all of that. I mean, we didn't talk about that. That's not the reason I would use it. I actually think it is much simpler. Unity is very, very complicated, and there's definitely advantages to that. But I think if you're starting out, Godot is just such a beautiful, very simple experience. In the same way as Next.js, it is very opinionated. As I said, there's no main function. For your global data, you have to do it using this like special global object. And in the beginning, I was a little frustrated with all of the sort of the opinionated nature of it. But once, at the end of it, when I launched my game, at that point, I totally come to understand why they had made those design decisions. So, I definitely think Godot is a great place to get started. There's a really solid community. Um, and you never have to worry about licensing issues or any of that. Um, even if your game isn't a huge hit, that's still a lot of red tape to have to jump through. Getting the professional Unity account, or I don't even know what it is. With Godot, it's like when my game was ready, I just shipped it. So yeah, I'd highly recommend it. There's one thing. Oh, there's Godot 3 and Godot 4. I jumped on the Godot 4 bandwagon a little bit too early, and it was in rough shape. You actually can't go back. If you go to 4, you can't go back to 3 unless you can with source control, obviously, but you lose whatever progress you've made in 4. But at this point, I think 4 is mature enough that folks can go straight to Godot 4, and it's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, you mentioned it earlier, but shout out to the Patreon sticking with us and all our supporters and people listening to us. This is a great episode. Game development, we always talk about that. It's like one of those first things that everyone always attempts to get in, and so it's a great gateway. I was going to say drug. That sounds bad. Gateway, just gateway. It's a great gateway to programming.
Great gateway. That's a hard thing to say. Great gateway.
Great gateway. Yep.
The Great Gatsby. So yeah, it's awesome. Thanks. Yeah, as Patrick said, thanks so much for our patrons. We're going to do the giveaway. So if you've ever wanted to be a Programming Throwdown patron, now is a great time. You could theoretically make money where you could be a patron for $1, get a prize, and then punch out. We won't hold it against you. I will say, actually, I feel a little bit bad. I said this is private, so it's not actually incriminating anyone. Someone did do something interesting. Elect to become a patron, send me a message saying they should be on our show, and then cancel their patronage before we even got $1. I thought that was clever, but I didn't respond. I felt like that was maybe beyond the pale. But being a patron, giving us $1 and then winning a T-shirt, I think is totally above water. I'm totally
like
cool with it.
Unethical life pro tips right here.
Patrick is shaking his head.
I'm out, man. I'm out.
All right. Well, hey, it's a pleasure to come record the show with Patrick for you all. We have a great time, and we will catch you all on the next one.
Music by Eric Barndollar.
Programming Throwdown is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike 2.0 license. You're free to share, copy, distribute, transmit the work, to remix, adapt the work, but you must provide attribution to Patrick and I, and share alike in kind.